where do you think that jazz is going to go, if you even have an idea for the future?
While I'm on the subject, there's a scholarship opportunity fund in my name. And
Really?
Wean, along with Wean, they allowed me to use their name on my letterhead.
I believe there was a bill passed, H.R. 57, that the politician from Detroit, John Conyers, helped to bring into existence, which delineates jazz as a national treasure and as such should be preserved, as America's indigenous music. So that was a good legislative move to acknowledge the music. Welcome, everyone, to Odds and Ends Jazz, life, entertainment, theater, and the arts. And tonight, we are presenting a very special woman whom I believe that everyone in the jazz world knew or wishes that they did know. And that is NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk. When Bob Ottenhoff hired her in 1979, the two of them are credited with starting and spearheading WBGO 88.3, which is the preeminent jazz station in the world. She has been advocating jazz and supporting musicians and even bringing Jazz to Kids, a program which brings jazz to venues. She brought drummer Winard Harper to Flushing Town Hall. And in 2020, she was given her NEA Jazz Master Endowment, along with Reggie Workman, Roscoe Mitchell, and Bobby McFerrin, and her late husband, Dorthaan Kirk, who played multiple horns at one time and is in the Guinness Book of World Records. She managed his career. There's so many things we could say about her, but we're going to let her explain about her life and the many triumphs and trials that she has lived through. And so without further ado, and with great pleasure, all of us at Odds and Ends Jazz present to you NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk. Now, I understand also was in 2020, you were granted the most highest prestigious honor for a jazz musician or someone involved in jazz, the NEA Jazz Master. I have a t-shirt on from Dorthaan Kirk, your husband, and I must say, he was on Atlantic Records. As you know, my father, CB Bullard, was with Atlantic. So I would hear all of his music around the house. You must have traveled a lot with your husband. Am I correct?
90% of the time.
Wow. So you got a chance to meet the best of the best in jazz. Now, tell us a little bit about this. I saw an article one day, many months ago, in the New York Times, and there were pictures of you, and I called you. I think I was in a cab. I said, Dorthaan, there's this article in the New York Times about this racial uproar at WBGO, and you said, I know, Clyde. I helped them write the article. My father, CB, had spent so many years at Atlantic Records, and he had a jazz radio show called CB's Vault on WWRVR in 1974, which kind of was just a little bit before WBGO. But I remember when I was growing up, whenever they would play jazz in the house, the company they would be dancing to jazz, clapping and shouting. This spirit of the music was really in them. And now it seems like jazz has become more like a listening art where people mainly sit and watch. They may clap or shout, but they don't seem to dance anymore. But there was a club in Brooklyn I think it's called the 966 Club in Brooklyn on Fulton Street. Before the jazz artists perform, they always form a circle and say a prayer. And whenever jazz is playing on the stage, people actually dance to the music. They're trying to keep that tradition that early jazz had, where people were actually dancing to it. Where do you think that jazz is going to go, if you even have an idea for the future?
I think the traditional jazz will always be around because there are so many musicians that are still playing it, and there are tons of different kind of workshops and programs for young people
In colleges and high schools?
in jazz, like the NJPAC Jazz for Teens, the Jazz House Kids, of which Melissa Walker and Kristen run. Don Braden goes to the Litchfield in Connecticut every year. So it's going to be always around because it's just the nature of it.
Right.
Remember when there was disco? You hardly ever hear about disco music anymore.
No, right.
You know what that was. Jazz is still around. Okay. True. Take Felix Hernandez's program on WBGO every Saturday morning.
Wonderful.
It's wonderful. That music goes back. I'm 83. It goes back to when I was a teenager. When something is really good and pure, it lasts. Okay?
It endures. Yeah.
It endures. When it's just a passing fancy, it doesn't. You know what I'm trying to say without going into like the whole history of music. Okay.
Yes.
I mean, you can hear anything from Duke Ellington to Robert Glasper on WBGO. Come on. So, right. And Duke would have been how old had he still lived? I don't know. I don't remember how old he was when he died, but he's still valuable. So I don't have any doubt that the music will be around.
I believe there was a bill passed, H.R. 57, that the politician from Detroit, John Conyers, helped to bring into existence, which delineates jazz as a national treasure and as such should be preserved, as America's indigenous music. So that was a good legislative move to acknowledge the music like that.
Yes, I remember that. That was somewhere in the late 80s, maybe very early 90s. I can't remember exactly the year, but I remember that. Okay.
Right. And now jazz is being taught all over the world, all universities, colleges, and, it's all of these early pioneers like your husband, like Jimmy Heath, Barry Harris,
yes,
who constantly believed in the music, played it, and now it is accepted. At one point, I heard in most universities, you were not allowed to practice jazz in the practice rooms because you could be expelled. So now jazz is with us forever, and it will always stay.
Back to Kanye. I'm really thinking about the Detroit Jazz Festival.
Okay.
I used to go there every year. It started out many years ago as the Montreux Detroit Jazz Festival. And it kicks off on Friday night of Labor Day weekend. And it goes Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, and Monday. And that festival has been going on for years and years and years. It's all free, Clyde.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I always say every year they really outdo themselves, and they have great sponsors. Are you familiar with Carhartt coats, those coats that men wear in the heavy of the winter?
No.
They're Palomino color. Look them up one of these times.
Okay.
Have a free moment.
Okay.
Carhart is the name of a family. I think it might have been from Grosse Pointe, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave the festival, the Carharts gave the festival $10 million a few years ago to assure that the festival would go on and on. Chase Bank is one of the sponsors, and on and on and on.
Now, what about George Wean? Did you ever go up to the Newport Jazz Festival? Did you ever meet him?
Did, but that's not where my relationship with him started. My relationship with him started way back when Rahsaan was living. He and his wife, Joyce.
Okay.
As well as, since you're talking about it, as well as John Schreiber, who was a young person back then. John Schreiber is now the president of NJPAC, the person I spoke about earlier.
Yes.
He worked for George. So,
okay.
Matter of fact, when NJPAC honored me, when I was retiring from BGO, NJPAC honored me. We called it Celebrating Dorthan at 80. And NJPAC honored me in the Victoria Theater. And John was really, really clear about telling people. He's very proud of having known me over 40 years. But see, Rahsaan worked for George Wean. And I don't know if you or your audience know it, but George Wean had a hand in festivals out of the country, like the festival in Switzerland, Montreal, Switzerland, and so on and so forth. He didn't just do Newport, and a long time ago when the festivals were in New York and so on and so forth. He always collaborated with those festivals out of the country. And once there was another festival, he used to have festivals in Houston, Cincinnati, Atlanta, New York. I can't remember all the other cities, but it will culminate in Boston at Fenway Park. Well, guess what? Every time he had a festival, Rahsaan was always included because Rahsaan had a big following. And so George always hired him.
Right.
And speaking of which, when Rahsaan had the stroke in 1975, the next year when George had the festival in New York, the part of the proceeds from the concert at Radio City Hall, he donated to Rahsaan. So,
wow,
I have history. I love George to this day because after Rahsaan died and I was working at WBGO and so on and so forth, he used to always say to me, "Are they treating you right over there?" And I would say, "Yeah, they are." And he would say, "They don't treat you right. You tell me." And while I'm on the subject, there's a scholarship opportunity fund in my name. And
really?
George Wean, along with Winton, they allowed me to use their name on my letterhead. You know how you have letterheads for different kinds of things that you do. So that's a little bit about my relationship with George. I don't know if you wanted to ask me anything real specific.
No, that's good. I mean, I was actually hanging out with Mr. George Wean maybe almost 2 years ago at the Newport Jazz Festival. He and his good friend, Dr. Glory Van Scott.
Yeah, I know her.
We were actually hanging out together, all three of us. And so he was real cool. We were supposed to be getting together to maybe talk about some ideas. But Christian McBride now, from what I understand, is kind of taking the helm of the Newport Jazz Festival. You know, he's got...
Yeah, he's artistic director. I'm I'm not exactly certain how all of that works, but yes, Kristen is artistic director.
Sure. And also phenomenal,
Yes,
phenomenal musician and
I
bassist, no
call
doubt.
him, as I do many, one of my children.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sure. Sure. And also, do you play any instrument yourself,
Oh,
piano or anything?
mm-mm, mm-mm. No, I
But you,
used to hate it when I was on the road with my son and people would ask me if I sang.
wow,
But no, I don't.
that's cool. But at least you developed a good ear. You know good music when you hear it, and you know when it's swinging, and you know when it ain't. So,
Well, when I grew up in Houston, my mother didn't have a TV.
really,
I listened to, remember, I told you I was 83. Go
right.
back and see when TVs were invented and so on and so forth. I left Houston to go to California in 1955. Having said all of that, I listened to the radio. I not only heard Duke Ellington and Count Basie and big bands, I heard Little Willie John.
Touch my hand and talk sweet talk. I got a knocking in my knees and a wobble in my walk. I'm trembling.
I heard country and western. It's what I did. You listen to the radio. That was the thing back then, especially since if you came from a family as I did, and look up TVs. My mother, we didn't say single mother back then. My father was more absent than he was
Present,
there.
right.
And she couldn't afford a TV. Uh, Houston, well, Texas is a lot of blues players come from there. I heard the blues. I heard everything. And it's amazing. And Ruth Brown is a good example. I
Mhm.
heard Ruth Brown on the radio. And in my wildest imagination, you couldn't have told me I would grow up and work with her. That was so far. I just never would have
Yeah.
thought.
Mama, he treats your daughter mean.
Yeah.
Mama, he treats your daughter mean. Mama, he treats your daughter mean.
So that's my experience with starting out listening to the music. Nobody told us it was America's art form. And so when I left Houston and went to California, there were clubs everywhere.
Hmm.
Generation Clyde, jazz was their music, much as hip hop or whatever the young people listen to today. That was our music. That's what you did. That was
Right.
just as natural as getting up going to church. That's what you did for your entertainment.
So your husband worked a lot out there. It was a very good move for him in terms of employment. He worked all the time.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet Count Basie yourself or Dizzy Gillespie?
I met Count Basie one time, and I have a photograph with him, even though I had seen the band a lot of times. This was a performance that he had done at Newark Symphony Hall in Newark. And he was in the wheelchair by then. That's the only time I really met him. Diz, of course, because I used to call up Diz, as I did many musicians when we used to do our jazzathons. You may have heard about those that we used to do. Diz never performed at the jazzathon, but what he would do, because those were benefits, what he would do is make a sizable donation to the station. So, yep, I met him.
That's beautiful.
Hmm.
I remember when I was a young kid, my father woke me up out of the bed and said, "Wake up, wake up. Milt Jackson's here. Milt Jackson's here. He wants to say hello." So I woke up. He turned the light on. Of course, being a kid, how do I, I'm thinking, the Beatles.
Right.
Oh, hey, how you doing? Yeah, right. Later on, I realized, wow, that was a legend who was a friend of my father's, like Dizzy and so many others.
Yeah.
But, being you're young, you're caught up in modernization and the rock and roll world. It took me many years to understand why was my father so excited about this music. When I was young, it seemed like, what's so big about that? And then you try to play it, you realize, whoa,
right.
You just can't play through jazz changes. You have to do some studying and some thinking,
right,
some working. It's a very sophisticated music. I'm glad to have been a part of it. I'm glad that my father, introduced me to the music because it was always around the house. My father actually was a disc jockey on a station long ago called WLIB. And when he was on the station, my mother would hold me in her arms and say, "Listen, that's your daddy."
wow.
And I would hear him on the station. And he had a very hip jazz show. And at the end of the show, he would sign off and say good night. This is Clarence Bullard. And he said, a man said, your show is so hip. See, when you say Clarence Bullard, it just sounds so unhip, man. Why don't you just call yourself CB?
CB.
And cut it short. Yeah. And so my father said, hey. And that's how he got the nickname moniker CB, because a jazz fan told him Clarence Bullard sounds so unhip.
Oh.
And so CB became synonymous with Atlantic Records, which he was there from 1967 to maybe 1994, 95. Right. So when I was coming up, I was always in the studio observing, Roberta Flack, Aretha Franklin, Donny Hathaway, the musicians, but I didn't care. I'm with my father. And I guess it rubbed off on me because here I am.
Well, it sure did, Clyde. It really, really, really did.
And I'm still reaching. You never stop learning as a musician and as a producer, curator, which is why I'm so blessed that you took the time to talk to us. We'll have you come back on the show at another time and maybe cover you when you're doing some other presentations after we get through this COVID. Things will maybe be renormalized and we can maybe have more planning, okay? So yes. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You've been my colleague, my friend, and thank you for letting me talk to you. And I've learned a lot in this short conversation, okay?
Okay, and Clyde, thank you for all you have done and continue to do for the music, okay? It's much needed.
I'm trying. And I want to thank you also for your contributions to the Jimmy Heath tribute that we did for Flushing Down Hall.
That was my pleasure. I was honored.
that was great.
But as I told you, Jimmy was family. Rahsaan recorded Watergate Blues. So I looked at Jimmy, person then, and Tootie as family.
Well, there's a whole new shift in the Keepers of the Flame, as many of the pioneers and architects of the music are passing on. We have new people now that have studied the music seriously and are keeping the flame. So Dorthan, NEA Jazz Master, Dorthaan Kirk, thank you so much for coming on Odds and Ends. We're going to meet again. We're not through. We have more to do, okay?
Okay, and bright moments.
Bright moments. Bright moments. Thank you.
Bright moments. Bright moments. Bright moments. Bright moments. Bright moments. Bright moments. Right now.
Thank you all for watching. Dorthaan Kirk, NEA Jazz Master and First Lady of Jazz at Newark's WBGO. We would like to thank Bob Odenhoff, the founder of WBGO, Thurston Briscoe, and the living, walking jazz encyclopedia, Gary Walker. Ola Rivera, Bobby Sanabria, Al Pryor, Rondo Hamilton, Sheila Anderson, Bob Porter, also Robin Bell Stevens from Jazzmobile, Jack Kleinsinger, Louis Armstrong House Museum, Wynton Marsalis, Sue Yellen. All of these people are helping to keep America's indigenous music alive and moving on to new generations. And a special shout out goes to Keystone Corner founder and director Todd Barkin, who has done so much for me and the entire world of jazz. And also to the late, great Phil Shapp, who did so much for the entire jazz world. May he rest in peace. And don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, Facebook, Rumble. Once again, thank all of you for tuning in to Odds and Ends Jazz. And one more great big loving thanks to NEA Jazz Master Dorthaan Kirk and to all those who are keeping jazz alive and well. And before you go, I want you to know that WBGO has the whole world swinging. Good night and stay bright.
Yeah.